And welcome back. Well, today, adolescents and mental wellness. As recent as 10 years ago, adolescents reported the biggest issue for them was drugs and alcohol. But today, it's depression and anxiety. And many say it's almost epidemic.
Dr. John Duffy is a clinical psychologist, podcaster, author, and expert in families, relationships, and teens. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for being here
today.
again.
Always great to be here, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've touched on anxiety and depression before, but I think it's so common and something that so many parents struggle with, wanting to help their kids, that I think it's always worth revisiting, especially because research is now showing the incredible numbers of kids who are dealing with anxiety and depression. There seems to be something about the adolescent brain that makes them more vulnerable to these things.
Absolutely. Well, it's on the rise for a number of reasons. One is social media. If you think back a generation ago, we weren't talking about anxiety and depression. If you take any kid now, any teenager, even preteen, a middle school child, they'll know an awful lot about anxiety and depression, to the point where there are help groups that are kid-created on Instagram and Snapchat to help each other through it. And it's stressful in other ways. Life is stressful for them in other ways. Social media, AP classes, just their social lives in general. They're stressed from their parents, college,
acceptance.
right? All of this stuff adds to the amalgam of things that create anxiety and depression in kids.
So question, is it learned, is it genetic, or we are enabling it?
Yes. All three are absolutely true, right?
Okay.
There's definitely a genetic component. There's not much we can do about that. It infects virtually every family tree. It's also learned, right? The vibe of our home can drive depression and anxiety. Sometimes we kind of teach this to our kids. We can also teach them the opposite. So maintaining and managing our own is really, really critical. Yeah.
Interesting. I think a lot of people wonder, is this a phase? Will kids grow out of it once they mature?
Yeah. No, that's not my experience.
Really?
Yes. No. It's not only is it not a phase, I think kids tend to acclimate to it as they get older. So the urgency to get therapy or get the help they need is so that they don't get too used to being anxious and depressed, and then their world start to shrink, and they just think, well, this is my fate.
Yeah.
But if you can target the thinking about the self, the world, the future that drives anxiety and depression, especially thinking about the self, that's what drives most of it, then you can mitigate that and it won't become habitual going into adulthood.
Well, I wonder about that, because, you know, they talk about your thoughts become your reality.
Yes.
You know, how you see yourself, what you say to yourself becomes who you become.
Yes.
And I wonder, do these labels then create it to last longer? You know, so I wonder in terms of psychology, because this is what you're doing. And as you see a psychologist and you label these things as anxiety, depression, and they can identify that as something that they have, does that help or hurt the problem in some ways?
Yeah.
I'm getting off topic, but it's just, I'm so fascinated by it.
Yeah.
It's a great question, because there are so many diagnoses now that affect kids, and kids will sometimes land in my office and say, well, I can't really make it to school. I've got this anxiety that prevents me from doing that. And I think if you carry and own that label, it does hold you back, and you really believe, like, oh, I'm limited in this way.
Right.
And so a lot of my work initially is, that doesn't have to be the case. We can work our way through that.
And this is an excellent, I have so many questions, and that's an important one, because a lot of kids with anxiety in particular, but also probably depression, are like, I can't go to school today. And parents are wondering, should I force them to go to school, make them go to school, or is it okay for them to stay home because they're reporting feeling anxious?
Right. The school refusal is a new thing, a really important thing. My strong bias is, once a kid gets out of the habit of going to school, reversing that habit is so very difficult. So I like the idea of working with the school, with the social workers, with the nurses, and get your child into the building. And at the very least, then they're there. And then you can say at the end of the day, hey, good job. I know you were really anxious going in there, but you managed your way through the day. And then tomorrow you can say the same thing, and then you develop a whole new habit.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you feel about medicating kids? Because then that's what people say. Well, they're saying they can't go. I need to listen to them. They want to set boundaries, you know, all these types of things that they maybe think are helping them. Then they think, well, maybe the only way they can get there is if I give them a medication.
Right. So in order, my favorite courses of action are cognitive behavioral therapy,
Agreed.
which is the kind of thing I do. If you find that that's not very effective, I think medication in a moderate dose, I'm not a prescribing doc, but this is what I would suggest, a moderate dose, while it facilitates that that therapy.
To get their balance, chemical
exactly,
balance up.
I'm all for that, but then eventually titrating down off the meds. Too many kids give too much credit to the medication. That's one concern I have. And also, if kids stop medication suddenly, there's this slingshot effect where sometimes the symptoms come back and they're worse than they were in the beginning.
And is that a perceived thing, or is it a true chemical imbalance?
I think it's a combination of the two. The perception can drive some of the chemical imbalance.
What about phobias, specific phobias? Because that's something that I read about that I think is particularly concerning to parents. And it can be identified as, probably a variety of different things. We've talked about OCD before.
Right.
But they say phobias in adolescence is extremely common, and between the ages, particularly between 13 and 18.
Yes. Yeah, so they truly are, and there's more and more phobias that kids adopt. They're afraid about their health, not just the spiders and the heights and the things that we think of, but they're afraid of a lot more things. They're afraid of school, for one thing.
I always thought I was choking as a kid. I remember that. If I tried to swallow a pill, I was like, oh, it's not going down.
Yes. Right. So there's specific therapies to address phobias, through exposure, which I think are really useful, really important. But the most important thing is, if your child is phobic, he or she believes that they can't manage some part of their world. So you also have to address that thinking as well. That broadly,
confidence.
yes, exactly. You need to build confidence.
Interesting.
We ran out of time, but just in a word or two, how do you know when you should get a professional, and how do you choose that person? I know that's a big topic.
It's big, but briefly, if you see a dramatic shift for the negative in your child's behavior that affects his or her functioning, they're not going to school, they're sullen, they're down, they're
not hanging
in their
out
room,
with
they're not
friends.
hanging out with friends, or they're hanging out with different friends, then there is no downside to seeking counseling, period.
And finding a good one, there's probably a lot of information online too on how to find a good psychologist. If it's not good chemistry, don't just stay with it, switch it up.
Always switch it up, find the right match, for sure.
Yeah.
It's good information. TheMorningBlend.com is our website. You can also find out a lot more about Dr. Duffy online. He's got a great podcast too. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so
for
much,
being
guys.
here.
Thank you so
That's great.
much.